Hello YouTube chess lovers and my friends, this is Gunjan here. Welcome to the 44th episode of Dirty Chess Tricks. In this episode, I am going to show you some of the wonderful tricks and traps exist in the 4 knights variation from the white perspective. The opening arises after the following move order: e4, e5, knight to f3, and knight to c6. And instead of playing bishop to c4 or bishop to b5, in my last Dirty Chess Trick video, I have recommended this tricky move, knight to c3, and as you can see, I have highlighted in the red arrows. All these options are covered in that video. So if you haven't checked it out, I strongly recommend you to go and watch that video before proceed further. In this lecture, we are going to concentrate on one of the most accurate response by black, namely knight to f6. So as the name suggests, we have 4 knights on the board, and here white has few options. If you are a Scotch player, then you can continue with d4, and after e captures d4 and knight captures d4, we directly transpose into the Scotch game, except there is one difference, that we have forced black to play the move knight to f6, which is benefit if you are prepared very well. Apart from knight captures d4, there is yet another aggressive move by white, namely knight to d5, known as Belgrade Gambit, where white sacrifices second pawn to get tremendous attacking position. However, in this video, I am going to propose the third tricky option, bishop to b5. So finally, we transpose into the one of the tricky line of Roy Lopez, and once again black has to play some accurate response. Kindly note that if your opponent here continue with either the move bishop to e7 or the move d6, then it is going to be transposed the line which we have already looked at it in my last episode. Let's say bishop to e7, then we'll castle on the king side, threatening bishop captures c6 and knight captures e5. So black pretty much has to defend this pawn with the move d6, and after that we'll play this forcing sequence d4, e captures d4, knight captures d4, attacking the knight, bishop to d7, bishop captures c6. If bishop captures c6, then knight to f5 is a very strong reply. So by force, black has to take with the b pawn. Afterwards, we will play this amazing move, bishop to f4. The whole point is, after black castle on the king side, we have this lethal blow. Yup, it's e5. And after d captures e5, bishop captures e5, bishop to d6, and the move bishop to g3. At the end of the whole sequence, we managed to give black some horrible pawn structure on the queen side, which are more than enough to create winning advantage over the practical board. The second option I want to consider is bishop to c5, which surprisingly more often I'm facing on the internet, and people who don't know the theory, they will routinely churn out this move, thinking that this is just yet another Roy Lopez or the Italian game. But here it is outright mistake, as in all the lines white get tremendous attacking initiative. Not to mention there are also some high profile tricks and traps. After bishop to c5, white should castle on the king side, and now black has two options. The first option, d6, looks more obvious as white is threatening the move bishop captures c6 and knight captures e5. But after this move, by force, white get a winning edge. Before I move on, I'd like you to pause this video and find out what is wrong with this natural setup by black. Well, I have won many games in this line as the sequence is pretty much forced. White played the move d4 attacking 2 spots, so black response is force. Black has to capture on d4. Afterwards, white will continue with knight captures d4, attacking twice on c6 knight. If black give up the bishop pair, then long run he is going to suffer, so natural response is bishop to d7, defending on c6. After that, we will continue with knight to f5, threatening knight captures g7 check. And here it doesn't matter whether black continue with castle or capture on f5. The most frequent response is black eliminate this dangerous looking knight with bishop captures f5, pawn captures f5, and now in the view of rook to e1 check, black is forced to castle on the king side. Afterwards, sting in the tail, bishop to g5, and you can already see knight to d5 or knight to e4 is coming up, and there is no way black can stop white to destroy king side pawn structure and open up his king. Recently, I have won a very quick game against a 1800, and you can see that game live in my second blitz session. So if your opponent doesn't play careful move from here onwards, the game can be finished very quickly. However, the story doesn't end here, because after the accurate response by black such as h6, bishop to h4, and now knight to d4, which at first sight looks very cool, right? Well, yes indeed, except here I have introduced my novelty, namely knight to d5, boom! So we are sacrificing the whole bishop and at the same time hitting on f6. Black has two good choices. Obviously he cannot take on f5, which is pretty bad. The simple reason is after bishop captures f6, g captures f6 and the move queen to h5, no matter however black wriggles, the game can be finished very quickly. For example, queen to c8 looks a logical reply, saving the knight. But here, white has this lethal reply, bishop to d7, and that knight is a goner. So let's see what's the whole point of sacrificing a piece after knight captures b5. Well, white's idea is very cruel. He wants to first of all play a4, hitting the knight. This knight has only one place to go, knight to d4, and now white reveal his nasty idea. Bishop captures f6, g captures f6, destroying black pawn structure on king side, and follow up with this wonderful blow, b4. So as you can see, by force white is getting a piece back, and even after one of the best reply by black such as c6, counter-attacking our knight, white can go with this forcing sequence, pawn captures c5, pawn captures d5, queen captures d4, pawn captures c5 and queen captures c5. After the whole transaction, even though we have a material balance situation, it is only black who is going to suffer for the rest of the game. So this is one of the wonderful forcing trick exists in bishop to c5 line, which can provide you lots of points, especially in the tournament practice. Instead of d6, black can also castle at this point, but this leads to the familiar territory, and if you have seen my last video, you already know it. Yup, it's deciding blow, knight captures e5. The whole point is we are destroying black center, and after the move d4, we are regaining our piece back. This line has been played few times at GM level, and let me show you few moves how white can continue, as after bishop to d6, you should not capture e5 immediately, but rather continue with f4 And not only in future white get his piece back, but you can see the space white is gaining in the center of the board, which give him ample opportunity to attack black on the king side. I have attached two model game in the PGN which will give you a very good idea how to play such a position. Okay, now let's deal with some of the main line of the 4 knights, and the first move is knight to d4, named as Chigorin Gambit. So here black is offering this pawn in return for bishop pair and some attack on the open e file, and accordingly bishop to a4 and bishop to c4 are the most popular choice. However, my suggestion is you should become greedy and capture on e5, which will completely shock your opponent. Basically, after knight to e5, it's all about preparation, and after watching this video, you are going to learn one of my secret dirty chess trick, which you can confidently apply in tournament practice. First important point, if black goes for the move knight captures b5, then white get a very good position after knight captures b5, c6, knight to c3, queen to e7, knight to f3, knight captures e4, and now the star move, castle on the king side. And you can already see black has some severe problems on the e file, and in fact I have attached a model game in the PGN between Nigel Short and La Ami, where black literally get crushed after few moves. So obviously knight captures b5 is not a good choice by black. The modern main line continues with queen to e7, attacking on the knight. White should continue with f4, defending the knight. And now black has to first remove the bishop in order to play the move d6. So he does so with knight captures b5, knight captures b5, and now the move d6. Okay, white has to move the knight, and kindly note, if knight captures e4, then castle is a very good response. So by force, black has to play queen captures e4, hoping that white will play the move queen to e2, and the resulting position is quite better for the black. But here comes the surprise. King to f2. And suddenly you can see the problem in the black camp. He has to deal with the two threats, rook to e1 and knight to c7. So by force we get him in the muddy water where black needs to provide some really careful moves. First move is very obvious, knight to g4 check. And confidently enough, we are going to continue with king to g3. And even though a king looks a bit funny on g3, still our threats are remaining as it is. I got this position few times in my games, and here black has the only response, queen to g6. In one game against 2000 rated opponent, continues with queen to c6, which looks more natural in this position, attacking the knight as well as defending on c7. But I'm afraid this is a big time mistake, as white has this winning continuation, queen to e2 check. If king to d8, then black king is already misplaced. So black has to defend the check with bishop to e7. Afterwards, we will pressurize this bishop with rook to e1. Okay, there's a mate threatened, so the only response is queen to d7, defending on e7. But here the disaster stuck on the black camp. My opponent get this rude shock. Bam! So it looks like we have done the exchange sacrifice, but in fact it's not, as after queen captures e7, we have this intermezzo, knight to c7 check, and after king to d8 and rook captures e7, black two pieces are hanging, and after the obvious continuation, king captures e7, knight captures e8, white clearly emerged with extra piece and a pawn. So that means here black has to forcefully play the move queen to g6, trying to get a discover attack on the white king. Well, accordingly white has the only response, knight to h4, attacking the queen, and black has two choices in this position. The first move, queen to h5, which I personally think is a bit inaccurate. The simple reason is, after knight captures c7 check, king to d8, if white goes for the rook in the corner, then I think g5 is a very strong reply. So accordingly, white has to play an accurate move in this position, and that is h3, counter-attacking the knight. Well, there is a line here where black can play the move knight to f6 and then sacrifice the queen, but I don't think so. Black can find it over the board, and even though if he find it, the resulting position is quite balanced for the white, and I have attached a sample line in the PGN. More often you are going to see this move, king captures c7, which is very obvious, destroying the attacker, but then white will continue with h captures g4, and we have a unique position where both the kings are misplaced, but white emerged with extra pawn, and practice shows that white has a very good winning ratio from this position. Queen to f6 at this position is one of the best reply by black, which has a very cunning idea that if you go ahead and play the move knight to c7, then g5 is a very strong reply. Well, of course, white is not going to fall for knight to c7 check, but rather he has to choose this very strong move, h3, attacking the knight. And if the knight retrieve, then knight captures c7 is definitely on the card. So accordingly, black has the only move in this position, g5, which actually threatening mate on f4, something which white needs to respond immediately. Here my recommendation is white should continue with queen to e2 check, and if black block the check with bishop to e7 or move the king, then f captures g5 is a strong reply. So once again black has to find the only response in this position, namely knight to e5. And if your opponent has not prepared well, then I doubt that he can find this move. Anyways, after knight to e5, the mating threat remains as it is, so white has to defend this with knight to f3. Once again renewing the two threats, and accordingly black response is force. He has to capture on f4. If g captures f4, then white can play the move king to h2, and it turned out that white king is more safer than the black king, and on top of everything, big threats are looming on the black camp. I got this position against a FIDE master where he continued with queen to e7, which is more logical in this position, defending every single threat and coming out as a pawn up. But this is just an illusion, as white can still go on and play the move knight captures c7 check. Okay, black response is force. Black has to capture this, and now white get his piece back with d4, and the whole point is sooner or later white will get his piece as well as pawn back with a great deal of interest. Let me show you what I mean. The game continues with f6. I capture on e5, my opponent recapture with the e pawn, and now I get my pawn back as well with bishop captures f4. Indeed, there is a threat of knight captures e5, so my opponent defended with bishop to d6. I continue with rook a to d1, and black has to be very careful at this position. If he routinely continue with bishop to d7, then white has this lethal sacrifice of rook captures d6. So accordingly, my opponent took the wise decision. He castled on the king side. Afterwards, I simply continue with pressurizing the black camp with queen to d3, attacking on d6. He defended with rook to d8. But when your opponent king is wide open like this sacrifice are bound to be happen in the game. And correctly enough, I continue with knight captures e5. F captures e5, what else? And now white give this check, which force king to go in the f7 square, as if he continue with king to h8, then rook captures d6 is obvious response. So accordingly here he decided to go king to f7, but this doesn't help him at all, as after bishop to g5 attacking the rook, e4. So for a moment it looks like I made a blunder, but thankfully here white has this saving resource. Rook captures d6, queen captures d6, bishop captures d8, and black should have exchanged the queen, where in the resulting position is slightly better for the white. But my opponent become greedy and capture on d8, which allow me to finish the game very quickly with rook to f1 check, king to e7, queen check, king to e8, and after queen to g8, king to e7, and queen to f7 check, my opponent simply resign, as not only black is going to lose his queen, but his king can hardly survive from such a position. The more often played move in this position is queen captures f4 check, which looks more natural, but in fact after king to f2, white is winning on the spot. We have two threads and black cannot parry both of them, as king to d8 leads to the move d4 and black is going to lose a piece. So that's not a good option for black. And the accurate response by black, namely g4, doesn't work here because of the following forcing sequence. d4 attacking the queen, pawn captures f3 counter attacking the queen, bishop captures f4, pawn captures e2, pawn captures e5 threatening knight captures c7, and it doesn't matter wherever the king goes, let's say king to d7, defending on c7, we can pile up on the d6 square with pawn captures d6, pawn captures d6, rook to e1, a6, knight to c3, b5, rook captures e2, and after bishop to b7 and rook to d1, the d6 pawn is doomed, and on top of 1 pawn advantage, white pieces are extremely active. So it is obvious that after knight captures e5, black has to know a lot of theoretical moves, and even if he knows that, the resulting position is quite favorable to the white camp. Last but not least, let's look at one of the most popular choice by black, namely bishop to b4. Well, here we are going to follow the main line for a while. Castle on the king side, castle on the king side, d3, d6, and now our familiar territory, bishop to g5, threatening knight to d5. Here two moves has been tried. If your opponent continues with bishop captures c3 followed by queen to e7, then I have attached a model game of Chigorin in the PGN, which will give you a very good idea how to play such a position for advantage. However, I like to show you one important trick in the move knight to e7, which is in fact the second best choice by the black. Here by far knight to h4 is the most popular choice. However, I am going to propose a very tricky move in this position, namely given up the bishop pair with bishop captures f6, g captures f6, open up the black king, and followed up with knight to h4. So as you can see, I have highlighted by the arrows very simple and effective plan of campaign by white, which gives him a very attacking chances on black king. Just to illustrate my point, I like to show you a miniature between two 2300 rated opponent, where black continues with obvious moves and still find himself at the losing end in a very short order. c6 happen on the board, white plays bishop to a4, and now knight to g6. So this is the whole point of playing knight to e7. Black can defend his king side with this knight and later on push forward with f5 and f4. Okay, white continue with knight to f5, capturing the important f5 square, and seeing white attack looming, black tried to exchange some pieces with bishop captures c3, b captures c3, bishop captures f5, and now e captures f5, attacking the knight, knight to e7 attacking the pawn, queen to h5 defending, and now black plays the obvious move, queen to d7 attacking twice on f5. Well, at first sight it looks like that pawn is a goner, right? But no, white has this tactical resource, f4, which saves the pawn in a broad daylight. Well, seeing black cannot do anything about that pawn, black switches attention on the c3 pawn with knight to d5. But I think this is a great inaccuracy, as the plan which I have mentioned earlier comes into the picture immediately with f captures e5, d captures e5, and the move rook to f3. Well, there is a general saying that if you can block your opponent f pawn, then your kingside attack will roll down, and here black has not one but two f pawns. Well, black realized the danger in this position and he continued with knight to f4 attacking the queen, but after queen to h6, I think the game is about to over, as rook to g3 is a potent threat and black played only few moves to keep himself alive in the game with queen captures f5. So in case of rook to g3, knight to g6 is a strong reply. But what he missed is, after rook to g3, knight to g6, white has another rook in the picture which completely slide away the queen, and once she goes away, white attack will literally crash on the black head with rook to f6. There are many ways white can finish black off. One of the easiest ways to play the move bishop to b3 and then something capture on g6. And second white option is rook to h3 and create some problem on the h and the g file. So I guess this is a model demonstration how one can bust knight to e7 line from the black. That's it guys, I hope you enjoy and learn this two knights tricky line against one of the most solid option by black. I am playing this line from last 1 year or so, and the good point I found about them is they are a lot of tricky and not many of your opponent are finding the right move order. Well, best of luck for trying out in your own game, and feel free to like, subscribe and comment on this video. I will meet you in my next episode very soon. Bye and take care.